Apreciados amigos y amigas, qué alegría que estemos todos juntos aquí en la Iglesia de Todos los Santos. Welcome, friends. It is wonderful. It is good that we are here together at All Saints Church on this LGBTQ Pride Sunday. My name is Mike Kinman. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the rector. Mi nombre Mike Kinman, soy rector, pronombre él. It is wonderful to have you here this morning. Before we get into our forum, I want to just give you a couple announcements about things that are going on here in the All Saints community. Our Sunday food table, as you know, has been continuing. We've made a shift in it. Instead of giving out Ralph's gift cards, we're now working with Hope Kitchen to provide prepackaged sandwiches and water on Sunday morning. And today we gave out 123 of those and 100 masks. If you want to continue to contribute to that, we're still working on how that works. In the meantime, the best thing you can do is continue to support All Saints Church because this is where this is coming from right now. So continue to give to All Saints Church so we can continue this ministry. We're also continuing to live in solidarity with Learning Works Charter School, which is an amazing community of teen scholars escaping from gang life. We're homeless, teen parents, pregnant teens living in group homes. So if you go shopping, when you go shopping, pick up some extra non-perishable food items, diapers, wipes, formula. You can drop them off at Learning Works, 90 North Daisy, Monday through Friday between 10 and 4. Every week we pick a partner in love who is doing amazing work in this community, particularly for vulnerable people. And this week our partner in love is Project Q. Project Q is a Black queer founded and run nonprofit that provides free gender affirming haircuts, empowerment workshops, clothing, internships, food and hygiene boxes, and job placement to LGBTQIA+ youth experiencing homelessness. And information is going into the chat and into the Facebook comments about how to support them. You can also Venmo them at Project Q. Today at 2:30, we have a listening session put on by the Racial Justice Ministry of how does the murder of George Floyd affect you, your family, our community, where do we go from here? Information on that is going in the chat, so you can stick around later and be a part of that. We also have a civil resistance teach-in that is happening. Andre Henry and Lauren Gruba are doing that, and the registration link, if that isn't in the chat, we'll make sure we get that for you. That is Wednesday at 5. And then Thursday at 6, we got a lot going on. We're having an All Saints Church Town Hall meeting. We're gonna start having these regularly. It'll be from 6 to 7 this Thursday. I'll be there. Monique Thomas, our junior warden, will be there. Other parish leaders will be there. It's a chance for you to hear what's going on and then ask any question or just lay anything that's on your heart about All Saints on the table. So please be there for that. We know that home is not a safe place for everyone. So in the chat, we're putting information from the National Domestic Violence Hotline and also Trevor Project, which is an amazing organization supporting LGBTQ youth. We also know that a lot of people aren't staying home. If you're like me and others, you're going out there and you're protesting to save Black lives, and that's a wonderful thing. And also to remember that we're still in a pandemic. So if you are able to go out, wear a mask, wash your hands, don't touch your face. And if you've been out protesting, go get a COVID test. In LA and LA County, they're offered free. I've been out there. I have one already scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. A link is going in the chat for lacovidprod.service-now.com. I've had to schedule one. So please, if you've been out protesting and you haven't already, schedule a COVID test. So you can know your COVID status and make sure that you're not a vector to this infection for anyone else. It is LGBTQ Pride Month, and we celebrate it in part because it commemorates the uprising of resistance to LGBTQ to police harassment and brutality at the Stonewall Inn in New York City. Resistance that began here in Southern California with the Black Cat Raid and demonstrations in Silver Lake. Stonewall as a breakthrough moment when lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer images of God refused to accept humiliation and fear as the price of living fully, freely, and authentically. And that is something to celebrate. And this week has been another cruel reminder that the struggle is far from over. 2 days ago, the Trump administration removed non-discrimination protections in healthcare and health insurance for persons of transgender experience. This is an attack, and once again, we must mobilize against it. And there's several ways you do that. The first thing we do is we reach out to people of transgender experience among us and love and support. And then going to put a link in the chat. You donate to organizations like Lambda Legal. There are 3 organizations that are preparing to challenge this in court: Lambda Legal, the Human Rights Campaign, and ACLU. Donate to them so they have the money they need to challenge this in court. And then register to vote, because we need a government that represents and doesn't betray the values that we hold most dear, values that literally are a matter of life and death. So it's clear that it's more important than ever that we remember our history as we organize and mobilize to continue to change the future. All Saints has been at the front of this struggle for decades, and we have to continue to lead. And there's an origin story there too. And that gets us into our forum. And for more on that, I just want to turn it over to Susan Russell.
Thanks, Mike, and welcome everyone. We are indeed in a moment that is a part of a wider movement. And we've been planning this forum for about a month, and we had no idea where we'd be today. And so with that said, I want to note what Andre and Lauren will be doing on the 17th is a workshop on movement building and civil disobedience, and how critically important it is that we understand that this movements don't just happen. They don't just spring spontaneously out of a petri dish as if all of a sudden the universe said, let's fix stuff. There's a backstory, there's hard work, there's groundbreaking, there's relationship building, there's pushing the envelope in a whole variety of ways. One of my mentors and great sheroes is Frederica Harris Thompson. And Frederica famously said that the reason we learn our history is to get back up in our past in order to get a running start on our future. So this morning, we're going to back up into our past a little bit with this archival interview with George Regas and some others, telling some of the story of what it took back in the 90s to make All Saints move forward with some of the first blessings of same-sex unions in the Episcopal Church, and how we can learn from that experience going forward. The video will be followed by a panel of awesome young queer activists talking about how do we do the work in our day that was done in the 90s by these giants of justice we're going to hear from in just a moment. So now, she said, pausing for Keith to find the video file, let's listen to that story.
Doing justice is in the DNA of All Saints Church. It was in the protest by All Saints Rector Frank Scott against the deportation of Japanese Americans to Manzanar in 1942. It was in the determination of John Burt to stand with Martin Luther King Jr. in spite of the death threats phoned to the All Saints Rectory in 1964. And it was in the voice of George Regas when he preached these words from the All Saints pulpit on November 11th, 1990.
I know many same-sex couples in this congregation. Some of them I know up close and down deep. I'm convinced without any question of the integrity and goodness of their relationship. I believe I should bless those unions if the request is made. Even though the National Episcopal Church says no to the blessing of same-sex covenants, I feel God is calling me and calling this great parish into a new place. I've come to believe that not to be willing to bless a relationship that is committed to the same standards of love and lasting fidelity as heterosexuals is to say, in effect, to a same-sex couple that whatever their relationship is, it is not fit for public Christian affirmation, support, and celebration. We should not be in such a place in this Christian community. The blessing of a same-sex covenant is the clearest symbol the church can offer that these precious children of God are fully accepted into the life of the congregation. Don't ever underestimate the power of healing such an act would bring. When we bless a union of a gay or lesbian couple, I believe this is what we are saying. The church sees goodness in you, goodness in your love for each other. We recognize your intention to share that love for a lifetime. The church wants to bless you on your journey and sustain you when the way is difficult. We cheer you on your way and hope for your success, and we shall rejoice in your victories and weep for your failures. After a long pilgrimage, I'm solidly committed to bless same-sex covenants at this altar. But I want to listen to you and make our way together as a parish. I look forward to that day when gay men and lesbians will be embraced fully and unconditionally in love with justice. And once more in this church, in this place, at this altar, those famous words of the prophet Amos will mark our corporate life. Let justice flow on like a river, and righteousness like a never-failing stream. Amen.
The decision to preach God, sex, and justice that November morning didn't just happen overnight.
Little by little, the word spread that All Saints welcomed the gay community. And more and more gay and lesbian people began to be part of that community. And they came to me in about 1980, and we want to start a gay and lesbian group. Well, I don't know about that. I didn't know how that would go over. And then, but we talked about it, and so I said, fine, let's do it. And then they wanted to have it announced in the bulletin. I said, golly, why can't we just do it on the side? And so galas were formed, G-A-L-A-S, Gay, Lesbian, All Saints. And so they would invite me about a couple of times, 2 or 3 times a year to come. And it was my first experience, really, of going significantly into a gay or lesbian person's life, to really hear them and be open to them. And so we did that for a few years. And then every time I would go, they would say, we want you, a couple of them there, we want you to bless our unions. And I said, well, I can't do that. Every time I would go, they would push me, battle me, argue with me. But I still questioned how to put it into practice and still keep my job. And so that's when, about 1988, 87, Mark Benson and Phil Straw came to see me. They taught Sunday school. Mark sang in the choir. They came to see me and they said, will you bless our union? I said, well, I'm all for you. I really know you. I love you. I know your love has integrity. But so let's have a blessing here in my office. They said, no, we don't want that. We want a blessing just like a straight couple in the church with all our friends where you bless us there. I said, well, I just don't think I'm ready for that. They said, well, we'll wait till you're ready.
Tim Safford, who's now rector of Christ Church in Philadelphia, was on the All Saints staff at that time and has his own memories of that wait. It was truly Mark and Phil who were the catalysts for the sermon. That is to say, first came Mark and Phil, and through them came George's conversion on blessings as public liturgies, because of their insistence that the ceremony be public, not private or hidden. Not that others weren't pushing him also, but Mark and Phil, from my vantage point, were key. They were the prophets to George, and through him to the larger church. I think it's similar to Jesus' encounter with the Syrophoenician woman. Jesus was only willing to break the barriers present so far, suggesting that to go further as to include her would be like throwing the children's food to the dogs. She looked him in the eye and told him, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the table. In a similar way, Mark and Phil were that woman to George. Tina Clark was one of those others Tim refers to.
We were at the newcomers, forum or whatever you have that they, back then, that they would invite you to. And we were in this big room, and this was all the people that were coming that were wanting to join All Saints. And we were doing a Q&A with our rector, which was George Regas. And so people were asking all the questions and the normal questions that you would ask about joining a new community in church. And all of a sudden, I just couldn't stand it anymore, and I raised my hand and I said to George, so what is your feeling on same-sex couples? And the room just got silent. And George just looked at me, and I know he's like my dad now, but looking back at it now, I think he was probably saying, oh my God, where did you come from and how soon can you leave? But there was just this pregnant pause, and everybody was looking at George. They were looking at me, and George walked back to me and he says, I'm working on that. and that was it. I think I became, in the beginning, with George, maybe a thorn in his flesh, because I would say, have you figured it out in your head yet how you feel about this? Do you know, what are you working on? What has to happen? And there was another couple here too, a male couple at the time, that was really pushing the answer, pushing for the answers. And I think that's what I was doing, is pushing for the answers, and not letting there be a distraction. It was a process, and it had nothing to do with, this was a long time ago. This had nothing to do, anybody that knows George's heart and the heart of this church, it's like, okay, I preach grace, and I preach love, and I preach we all come to the table. So let me see how I get there fully and authentically. Am I happy that 20-something years ago, more than 20 years ago, that I asked George that question? I don't think in my wildest dreams ever thought it could be what it is today.
Wow. One of the things we were talking about before is that I've read a bunch of George's sermons, but actually hearing George's voice preach is an extraordinary thing. And so we've heard the story of how Tina and Mark and Phil and others used their voices to help move George Regas and All Saints Church into the forefront of LGBTQ inclusion in their generation. So there's been a lot that's been done, and there is so much more that's left to do. And so we have an amazing panel here. So thrilled, not just that all four of you are here this morning and grateful for that, but for everything that you are in the All Saints community. And that is Thomas Diaz, Kelly Erin O'Phelan, Hannah Earnshaw, and Charis Graham. And really this is for you to just sort of kick around and challenge us and speak the truth that is on your hearts. And so really, I just want to open it up and say, what do we need to hear from you today to keep moving forward? What comfort zones do we need to challenge? What boundaries do we need to cross? We have this value of courageous justice, and that word courageous is so important. What is justice that is truly courageous for All Saints right now? And so I'll just throw that open, and which one of you wants to jump in first?
I guess I'll go. Good morning, everyone. Thomas Diaz here. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm one of the co-leaders of the LGBTQ ministry and also a vestry member. It is a joy to be with all of you this morning. And I want to open up with a quote that I remember reading when I was about 18. It was really the first time when I was trying to figure out my own queer identity. And it's a quote by Marsha B. Johnson, who led us in through Stonewall. And she says, as long as gay people don't have the rights all across America, there's no reason for celebration. And I've been hearing across many different, organizations throughout this past week and who are saying, this is probably the first Pride today that is really reflecting of its original origins. Because what we're seeing today is not a celebration, it's a demonstration. And it really actually highlights what Pride was actually meant to be annually. It was meant to be a moment where the LGBTQ community can come together and actually demonstrate for their rights, for their equal protection under the law. And the idea that it's only meant to be a time just to celebrate, underserves our capacity to actually be celebrated every day. It should not have to take a month for our society or for corporates to post rainbow flags throughout their stores or their businesses to mark a celebration of our identity. This is something I do every day, and that's again an encouragement that should be sent throughout our whole community. Is that our celebration is every day. And often it comes at times like this where it's challenged because it really begs the question, what exactly are we celebrating? And most importantly, we're celebrating who we are. And as people of faith, we are celebrating that we are images of God and that who we are is beloved. And so now we're in a new phase, what I would say is Pride is heading to. And when you think about the night of Stonewall, it was a messy night. You had riots, you had folks coming out, and I remember there's a documentary on PBS, which I think is called Beyond the Wall, and it highlights how this was really one of the first times that you had folks coming out that didn't look the part, because we forget too that for a while to be, at the time we used the terminology gay and lesbian, you almost had to look the part in order to fit in. But for the first time that particular night, you had folks who were not fitting in. And I think now we look at 2020 and we're going to start seeing, I'm sure, images coming through our TV screens later today. You're going to see a very diverse people of coming together and trying to demonstrate for their protection under the law. And that, again, is to highlight that this was its original origins for Pride, and it's a demonstration. And we must continue on with that movement. And lastly, we have to realize that as a church, that we have to then reckon with the question as a church, that if we are following a God who is with us and stands with us, then we also have to believe that this is a God who hears the cries of the poor, the cries of those who continue to be marginalized, the God who continues to cry with those who feel excluded to the community, or for us, the table. And the reality is that that still continues to exist in the wider church and in our community. When, you know, various denominations are still struggling with that, and that has to be challenged. That's the reality that we're living in. And I think in a moment like this, where we're seeing a new movement being born for defending Black lives, today we can say that this is also a recognition that LGBTQ folks of color have often continued to be excluded in the community, in churches, you know, and quite frankly for protection of the law. And we're seeing that with our Black trans siblings, which we saw this past weekend. So, you know, this is a demonstration. Celebration is every day for us as queer people, but this is a demonstration that we're seeing this month.
And thank you, Thomas. Kelly, Erin, Hannah, Charis.
Hi, yeah, thank you for that introduction, Thomas. And my name is Hannah Earnshaw. My pronouns are they, them. I'm non-binary, and I gotta say, what's on my heart right now is a lot of exhaustion, misery, anger, fear, and I'm sure if you know any other trans people in your life, they're going to be feeling some combination of the same way. It's been a really, really rough week for us in terms of the voices speaking out against our rights. And looking back on the video we saw just now, like the word that kind of comes to mind for me is discomfort. In our time today, when the trans community especially is feeling extremely rough over the kind of news that we've had, look back and see how the journey towards inclusion in the past has been one of discomfort, not just for the people who are trying to be acknowledged, the gay people who want their unions blessed, everything else, but in terms of the establishment, the church, the leadership, having to really grapple with their own kind of, I'm not sure about this, I need to think about it, before we could actually get to the point where we are included. And I think now I'm very grateful that, like, All Saints Church, for example, has got to the place where there is now, for the most part, no longer that discomfort in terms of wanting to affirm same-sex unions, but there are still a lot of areas around the LGBTQ community and our needs which All Saints and its community is still uncomfortable with. For example, while All Saints can pride itself on its kind of inclusion and blessing of same-sex unions, there is, I think, a lot less general understanding about what it means to be trans in our community, or what it means to be non-binary. I've now sort of given a couple of talks or sort of recorded podcasts and that kind of thing on being non-binary and kind of the basics of, say, pronoun use and that kind of thing, which I know sort of All Saints as a community people are still trying to get to grips with. And I think in these kind of times, I want to encourage a community that wants to really live out radical inclusion and courageous justice to step into that discomfort and work through it. I think a lot of the time people can get quite stuck in this place where they're like, oh, I don't know, I'm kind of uncomfortable with they, them pronouns. I don't really know how to use them. I feel a bit insecure about them. I'm uncomfortable. And what I think you all really need to hear is that, yes, that might be uncomfortable for you, but you really need to work through that. That if we want to be a community of radical inclusion, there is work that needs to be done, and maybe that isn't going to be comfortable. Maybe that involves sitting down and not just sort of hearing what the queer people around you have to say, but actually listening, internalizing it, practicing, doing the work. Because as well, the sorts of things that people are finding uncomfortable at the moment are the basics. Like, they, them pronouns is not, this is kind of the 101 level that that you really need for inclusion of trans and non-binary people. There is so much further that All Saints can go in terms of learning about the sheer variety of kind of identities and experiences and the overlaps of different things, such as sort of, you know, how race and cultural identity plays into queerness. Things like sort of lesser known sexual orientations, bisexuality, pansexuality, asexuality. There are all of these things that I would really love to kind of teach All Saints about and bring up into the discussion and really talk about. But like, what we need is for the All Saints community to really get on board with learning and engaging with this, and really committing to kind of self-education and self-improvement, even if it's uncomfortable to admit that, despite kind of our identity as a radically inclusive church, we don't know everything yet. Yeah, basically, I'd just like to encourage some discomfort and some proper grappling with what we have to face, because believe me, we out here in the trans community are very uncomfortable already. Yeah, please sit with us on that one.
Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I want to pass it on to Charis. Would you like to?
Hi, I'm Charis. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Yeah, as both Thomas and Hannah were saying, you've got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable to an extent, because when you're part of the LGBTQ community, there is a constant kind of, am I good enough? Can I fit in here? Where do I belong? Especially on my journey, when I was figuring out that I was bisexual. At the beginning, it was a bit like, oh, what's going on here? Why do I have same-sex attraction? Because it wasn't something that I had a whole bunch of exposure to at that point. So it was discomfort with myself. And I think that is something that a lot of people in the LGBTQ community experience. And so we're uncomfortable. We can be uncomfortable sometimes on a daily basis. And so for people to be inclusive and work to bring everyone to equal ground, everyone needs to be uncomfortable and be comfortable with being uncomfortable. All Saints itself, one of the things that I do think still needs to be worked on is pronouns. I still hear people not giving their pronouns when they introduce themselves, and I try to do that, but even I don't always do that. And it's a process. It's a learning process. It's something you need to work on, and I fully accept the fact that I need to work on it myself. As Hannah was saying, don't be afraid to do research. It's not like if you do a simple Google search, you're gonna go up in flames and spontaneously combust. Just Google search, watching videos, finding other people's stories, and then you can learn and figure out what you can do to help. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name's Kelly Erin O'Phelan. My pronouns are they, them. I work at All Saints Church. I am the children's minister, but I'm so much more. It's good to be with you all today. I think to answer Mike's original question, like so many other isms that we keep hearing over and over again this week, or at least my social media feed seems to be saying the same message over and over again, that you never arrive as an ally, that you have to keep working and learning and listening to the voice of the LGBTQ community, especially the voices that really challenge your perception. And I think it's important to listen to a wide variety of LGBTQ folks and to be able to learn from them. And you can't just say, well, my gay uncle says they, them pronouns are a fad that young people use, so I don't have to learn them. It's important to listen to LGBTQ voices that may make you uncomfortable and question what you have heard, because the movement, it moves. What made you an amazing ally in 2012 probably isn't going to make you an amazing ally in 2020 if you just stay in that 2012 mentality. And I think a huge growth spot for folks, especially at All Saints, is of course with the trans and non-binary community. If you have questions about that or are confused, you might enjoy the Children's Chapel book, Neither. I think so many of us at All Saints understand that yes, pronouns are important. I can put them in my email signature and boom, I've got it. When in reality, it's not helpful to put your pronouns in your email signature if you aren't able to use pronouns besides she, her, and he, him, his. Because what you're doing is you're signaling something that you haven't arrived to at. You're signaling yourself as an ally of trans people, which is awesome. But if you're unable to use they, them pronouns, signaling yourself as an ally to trans and non-binary folks can be less helpful. So a really important thing to do is, of course, is to educate yourself. And one way to do that is a book I recommend. I should have had it on the couch with me, but A Quick and Easy Guide to They, Them Pronouns. If you Google that book, it'll come up right away. And it's a really incredible, just like Pronouns 101, what does a non-binary mean? What is a they, them pronoun? Why do I have to learn to use it? And there's actually tools online, if you Google practicing they, them pronouns, that you can practice online, on the internet, and make your mistakes online. So the next time you meet someone who uses they, them pronouns, you're gonna be a lot more comfortable and you're gonna be a lot more ready to use their pronouns, which is exciting.
So yeah, thank you, everyone. It's interesting how you each came at this from a different way, but there were also some themes in there, and one of the themes is discomfort. And you know, Thomas, you talked about that in terms of this is a demonstration, and demonstrations are about agitation, and demonstrations are about disruption, and are about making people uncomfortable. And Hannah, you talked about discomfort and where do we need to sit down in our discomfort, and really how uncomfortable are we willing to be? That was something that really came through to me watching the video of George, especially at the interview where he was talking about, you know, when he offered to do the blessing of same-sex unions in his office, and they're like, oh no, he's like, I'm not ready for that yet, and he was wrestling with his own, you know, discomfort in that. You know, as Charis said, be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and Kelly Erin sort of the same thing. This is going to be uncomfortable, and what I wonder is one of the traps of being a progressive church is that we can think we have arrived when you never really arrive, and we can be so rightly proud of the road that we have traveled in the past that we kind of rest in that place, and we've identified some areas that we need to work on, get on board with learning and engaging, committing to self-education and self-improvement, really dive into understanding about what it means to be trans and non-binary, and do the work. But I want to sort of go to Kelly Erin, something you were talking about, which really essentially is also generational differences that we have. I remember when I first got here and started using the word queer, because it had been explained to me by people who were millennials and younger that this was a really important word to use. And there was some real pushback from people in older generations who had been damaged by that word. And as you said, the movement, it moves, it doesn't stay the same. Can you talk about some of the generational differences in this movement, and what does that mean for us today?
I've been spotlighted, so I guess I can go quickly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that like with things like the use of the word queer being important, like I use the word queer to identify myself as a queer non-binary person. And I identify my gender as queer as well, because it doesn't fit in a box for me, and that's okay. But the word queer, as far as sexual orientation goes, I think is like a lot of younger folks, especially, and of course older folks use it too, but a lot of younger folks especially like the word because it encompasses a lot of different genders. Like to say that, you know, like I for a long time identified as a lesbian and I'm married to a trans man. So like it's like, I think queer is great because it just allows for flexibility and movement and allows that gender is a vast and wild thing. And I might date a lot of different genders, and that's okay. And so queer for me is an incredible word that encompasses like my identity, who I am, and also allows space to not put myself in a box. So that's why I like the word queer personally.
Okay, others? What about Jenna right now? Yeah, go ahead.
Jumping in and sort of looking at the changes kind of between generations, it's also interesting to look at the similarities in terms of where history is repeating itself. Like a lot of the people who are familiar with the struggle for same-sex relationships to become accepted over the past few decades will be very familiar with the kind of language used by those who oppose it, sort of saying, well, this is all sort of, is it sexual perversion? They're going after a kid. It's unnatural. These kind of different things people would say. We're seeing come up again, this time not in the context necessarily of same-sex relationships, but in terms of transgender people and our right to exist in public, to be able to use public facilities safely in order to be able to just live out our gender day to day without harassment and without people like assuming that we're dangerous predators or anything like that. A lot of that same language is coming back in terms of, like we can't let trans women in the changing room because they're all predators or something like that. This is exactly the sort of language that was used against the sort of the gay and lesbian parts of the community decades ago. And I think we can really learn from the experiences of sort of activists of the previous generation. I would hope that they have a lot to share with us in terms of their wisdom and experience in terms of how to push back against these narratives, because this isn't new. We've seen it all before, and the people who have done the work in the past are going to be really invaluable allies in the work that still needs to be done, because these are some of the same battles, just dressed up in a different way. So I think there's a lot of continuity there in terms of what still needs to be done.
Yeah, we just got we're starting to get questions. By the way, if you have questions, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and we'll work with them. One of the questions that came through is, well, why are pronouns important? Which that's a great question, and I'm actually going to take that one because pronouns this is about identity. Identity is sacred. It's who we are, and being able to be who we are created to be and who we are becoming it's a sacred right. It's a human right. It's a beautiful thing, and it's a holy thing. And so pronoun is about that piece of identity of saying, this is who I am, and this is my ability to say who I am, and its ability for others to see me as who I am. And that is important, and it's sacred. And, for someone like me, most people will assume correctly that my pronouns are he, him. And because I have the privilege of that assumption, then I can pretty much get away with never having been misgendered in my life. And it puts the burden on people who don't have that privilege to always be correcting people. And so why I use my pronouns and say, hi, my name is Mike, my pronouns are he, him, is it normalizes it. Because everyone has the right. I have it, you have it, everyone has the right to be identified correctly and to be seen for who they are. And the more of us who make a point of saying, here are my pronouns, we normalize it, and we don't just make it people whose gender identity may not be as apparent to always have the burden of doing that. And so why is it important? First of all, it's an act of love. And it's important because our identity is important. We're made in the image of God. And what that looks like and what that is becoming is sacred and important. And it's how we love ourselves and love one another as God loves us. So that's, that's an answer to that question. Jim Albarano says, what can I do right now to help my hurting trans siblings? I want to give everyone a hug, but my arms will not fit through the screen. I want to bring comfort, even if only for a moment. What do you have for Jen?
Very, very quickly, one thing that will really help the trans people in your life is be an advocate for us. With all of these sort of policy things coming down from above, a really helpful thing that you can do is to pick up the work of writing to representatives, writing to lawmakers, MPs, if that applies to you in Britain as well. Just take up some of that work and some of the fight in terms of advocating for us and fighting back against these unjust sort of changes in law and policy.
I would say too, especially as we're going into an election, we're getting closer to our election season, it really has to take folks like to be able to do the work and actually see who you are voting for. And just as Hannah said, writing to your representatives, getting to the Senate involved. And also to, what's most important is that folks would forget that even at the local level, your cities, your counties also hold a lot of policies, especially for trans folks. So really paying attention to that. And, and I'm sure that's something that for us as a ministry at All Saints, we can be an advocate of help for that. And that's something that I know that Hannah and I will be working on as we kind of approach the voting season, because this is going to be a very tremendous part of how we, elect our officials. So making sure that you are reviewing all your ballots with that.
I just sort of jump from that to something else, particularly for you, Thomas, but really for anyone, because you brought up sort of the whole idea that like this is, this started with a protest, and it's like this is a protest. And that's about the intersectionality of the movement, which is something that more and more over the last 5 to 7 years has become more and more in our awareness. And it has to do with things like, pride parades, having corporate sponsorship, and arrangements with police that, the Black and brown community are saying, we don't feel like that these are, we're not safer because the police are there. And it's who's showing up for whom. And so can you talk a little bit about the growing awareness of intersectionalism? And how can we avoid, I know what I heard Gene Robinson, I know he's not the only one who calls it the oppression Olympics, which sort of puts Black Lives Matter in competition with LGBTQ rights, in competition with you name it. So can you sort of talk, I'll start with Thomas, but can any of you sort of talk about that emergence and where we need to push that envelope?
Absolutely. And I think a prime example of that would be what's today of what was supposed to be the LA Pride. And what ended up happening was that, also because of the pandemic, it was postponed and there was nothing to be on the streets. And then now we had Defending Black Lives Matter happened with the movement. And now there was something that came across where you had LA Pride who came out and said, let's get everybody back on the streets and let us be part of the movement, without actually inquiring with the Black Lives Matter or the folks who are actually in the intersectionality of color, right? And so what you see is, I'm not sure if there's really a clear-cut response to that, because I think we're still kind of in the beginning of, process of figuring out what does that now mean in this movement now. What I suspect is that as time does roll on, we're going to see what I think the hashtag that's been out there is, that's amplify the voices. That's going to be what I think is going to gear towards what this is going to look like when we have the intersectionality of folks of color, and BIPOC is now was really starting to get out there, which is the brown, indigenous, and people of color. And that's going to be important, but I think the only way to get there is it has to start with actually amplifying those voices first, and taking the lead with that. I really would say it's probably even still too early, but probably in the long run, we're late in the game, right? It should not have been this moment, like, oh, now let's amplify the voices. No, it should have been there from the beginning. And I would say on a personal level that this is something I think I have reckoned with since, probably since I was in high school, and trying to always figure out, one is my identity, but also to know that, the slap of color in my skin really determines how things are run. And then having to, and not only that, you have, even within that, then you have different kind of generational experiences. Like I'm 5th generation here in Los Angeles. So we're talking about my great-grandparents, coming in from Mexico. And so a lot of assimilation has happened in my family. And now and there's that reckoning that happens. And so, all this intersectionality can get sticky at times, but in a moment like this, and where we're seeing the movement going, the best, I would say, response to that is that we have to start amplifying the voices, the Black, indigenous, and people of color voices, because that's what the movement needs to go towards. And I think the goal is that now that's crossing the boundary. That's the boundary we need to cross, because it's those voices that I believe will determine where this movement needs to go, versus, as you're saying, having it being corporate or even co-opted by another, organization, or just another movement that could happen in between.
So we're starting to get more questions in, and so anyone, this is for anyone, but it kind of relates to what we were just talking about, which is get this with Black Lives Matter having a moment. Are you reluctant to break in with an LGBTQI message at this time? And someone just erased that question, so I guess they don't have that question anymore. So you can answer that if you want, because the question just disappeared as I was trying to read it. And so. I think it sort of speaks to the tension that you're talking about. So let me shift to a different question, which is, John Armstrong asks, how much of the pushback that you receive for, quote, being you, unquote, do you think is because others don't want to acknowledge that same being aspect within themselves?
Yeah, I actually want to jump in on the question that was erased,
Okay, great. I just didn't know if I had the full question. Go for it.
Thomas was saying, because I think it's really good and important, that the movement for Black Lives was founded by many LGBTQ folks, and has always been an intersectional movement that has always been pro-LGBTQ, has always been pro-trans, has always done their homework on LGBTQ issues, especially when the queer community has not always shown up for Black lives. Mm-hmm. The Black Lives Matter movement has always shown up for LGBTQ people. Especially in LA, the local BLM chapter is incredibly pro-LGBTQ. The White People for Black Lives, the affinity group for white folks who are interested in the movement for Black Lives in LA, has always been extremely pro-LGBTQ as well. And just the more I get involved, the more like, oh, wow, that it's very, very, like it speaks to me as a queer person, and is all about doing the work of knowing your own stake, because when Black people, Indigenous people, all people of color get free. All of us get free, which is an absolutely incredible thing. So my fight for trans healthcare and all LGBTQ rights is so tied up with the movement for Black lives and making sure all people of color feel seen and heard and respected and cared for in the law and in society. Those two things, I mean, we're dealing with a lot of the same things with, like, police are horrible to trans people too. Like, you know, like abolishing the police has to do with the two things go together. Like both of us there's an advantage for that for both of us. So I think the more that I think LGBTQ folks always have to remember that BLM and the movement for Black Lives has always been incredibly pro LGBTQ.
Thank you. Anything other on that? And then also the other question that John had, which was how much of the pushback that you receive for being you do you think is because others don't want to acknowledge the same being aspect within themselves?
So kind of going to draw back an earlier response we were having about, you know, the difference between, you know, the gay and the gay label and the queer label. You know, a lot of it we have to remember is often that comes from a place of like, because I can't understand you, if I can put you in this box and category, then somehow my definition of it will be better for me to interpret you. And so I would say, as a person who, you know, the reality is this as well, as a young person, and the experience is that it is a constant battle to, you know, always figure out, today when I walk out the door, how is this going to run out? How's this any going to be? And I think it's that, you know, that challenge of saying, am I safe in all spaces that I walk into? And really reality is probably not always. But the important thing about it is that when there's a space to say that the labels are one thing, but actually we just want to know who you are, that's the gateway to what I would say is liberation. That's the gateway to freedom, because now we no longer have to identify with the labels that, you know, it's a great acronym and we love it. We say, you know, LGBTQ and it's great. But I think the danger is that unless you, again, are amplifying those voices and you're hearing out those folks who identify within that acronym, you can be running off with your own definition. And again, and saying, because I want to feel comfortable enough. And yet what we're suggesting is that get discomforted and actually lean into the story, lean into the narrative versus just what we have as a across the board definition of what it means to be LGBTQ+. You know, that's the work that needs to be done, especially by our allies.
Thank you. We have about 2 minutes, and I want to give each of you a chance to, I guess, well, in about 30 seconds, just sort of wrap up. And is there a real message that you just want to leave us with? Kelly, Erin, why don't I'll start with you. Go ahead.
Sure, I can say something really quick, and I realize I'm cutting into my own time. If we go a little over, I definitely want to make sure Charis has a moment to speak as well. I just want to encourage folks to, right now, as the world seems intense and it's hard to know what to do, an incredible way that you can show up for trans folks right now is to donate to our partner in love, Project Q, which is an incredible organization that is founded and run by a trans Black person who just has been doing the work for years and knows how to do this work. So to support someone in the community who's already doing the work is an incredible thing you can do. Project Q makes it super easy because you can even Venmo them if you're into that. I love Venmo. So I encourage you to make a donation to Project Q, who has done the work and is continuing to do the work.
And that information just went in the chat. Hannah.
Yeah, I guess, so the note I want to leave folks on is that to remember that the LGBTQ community is not a monolith. You know, there is so much diversity in terms of our different experiences, our different identities, how they overlap with other parts of our lives and identities. And I think just the route towards understanding it is just to listen to people's stories, go out and look for, you know, sort of people writing about their experience, YouTube videos, blogs, anything. Just absorb all of these different stories and experiences and really start to get a really kind of full impression of the sheer variety of experiences and also needs within the community. It's like there will be no one action that can help everyone. It requires just a commitment to understanding it as much as you can and listening, basically.
Thank you. Thomas.
Yeah, I just want to say amplify all both that Hannah and Kelly mentioned, and what I actually would like to do instead is actually add a commercial here, and that is I invite folks of our community to please join the LGBTQ ministry this coming Friday for our social gathering. We have a special guest, the Reverend Marcus Haley, who is going to be joining with us and speaking on his new book, Proclaim. And it's just going to be a phenomenal evening. And again, we wish we could do this in person, but we're working with the times here. And allies are welcome. And visit the LGBTQ Facebook page or Instagram page for a Zoom link. And hope to see you there.
We'll push that out there too. Thanks so much, Thomas. And Charis, what do you want to leave us with?
Hi. I mean, so kind of something I wanted to touch on as we wrap up is others define themselves by their experiences. So you have to have an experience of hearing someone else's experience to be able to relate. Something that I do think All Saints could work on is opening up to the neurodiverse community and to the disabled community. Because I'm on the spectrum, and so something that people who are on the spectrum who are disabled can get a lot is that you can't be part of the LGBTQ community because you don't understand yourself, you don't have the there is a stigma against being, let's say, autism spectrum, for example, where you can't understand yourself. That is the stigma. That's not true. You can still be a complete human being, even if your brain is wired differently, even if, you are nonverbal, even if all these different things, just because you were born differently. And so that is something that is a big part of the where we can open up is being welcoming to, people of color, but also to people who are disabled, people who are neurodiverse, neuroatypical, because there are media-defined ideas of what it means to be LGBT. And the minute we keep thinking those ideas are the end-all, be-all idea, image of what it means to be LGBTQ is the minute that we start erasing, everyone else's identities. So you have to be willing to, you have to look beyond just what you see in the media and, dig deep and find these stories of people who, don't always get to talk. And, as Thomas was saying, you need to amplify those voices because a lot of the people don't have a voice to speak, especially as a lot of the time they are viewed as not, it's seen as they can't speak for themselves. So, I'm autistic, but I'm still bisexual. I can still identify that about myself. There is nothing different about how I feel about sexuality because I'm still, I'm still human. I'm still able to identify myself as who I am. And I just think if we don't acknowledge, that there are so many people out there who are LGBTQ and don't get to say it, you completely erase what is being said.
Amen. Charis, thank you so much. There's no better way to end it. So I'm just going to end it right in there and say thank you, Charis, Thomas, Hannah, and Kelly, Erin. Thank you so much for the witness that you continue to be in this community and for the gift of your time this morning. Thank you.